Welcome to the Explore Words, Discover Worlds podcast from Bradford Literature Festival. In this episode, Rabbi Dr Harris Bor, Dr Yaqub Chaudhary, Revd Dr Chris Goswami and Chair Zeshan Zafar explore how AI is entering spaces once reserved for spiritual counsel. Can machine logic align with religious wisdom, or are we witnessing its quiet transformation? Recorded live at the 2025 festival, our panel will examine how faith traditions are responding to AI's expanding role in spiritual life.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's discussion. It's a vital discussion as well around AI and religious authority. When machines preach, who leads? Just wanted to thank the Bradford Literature Festival once again for their commitment for these types of discussion. Last year, we had the opportunity to talk about faith and ethics with various different distinguished speakers. And this year, we wanted to do a bit more of a deeper dive to look at how AI intersects with religious authority. So to set the context and background to today's discussion, it's clear that artificial intelligence is no longer confined to tech laboratories or the boardroom, and it's now started to enter sacred spaces. From AI-generated sermons and virtual fatwas issued online to spiritual chatbots, advising on prayer and grief, we are starting to witness machines that are now stepping into roles once held exclusively by religious leaders. Yet these developments raise profound questions. Can machine logic replicate sacred wisdom? Can an algorithm comprehend the human soul? And compounding this is the risk of cultural homogenization, with over 50% of the world's digital content and more than 60% of AI training datasets are in English, despite it being only the third most spoken language globally. As a result, AI often reflects the moral assumptions, languages, and biases, sidelining traditions from the global south and misrepresenting minority voices. Faith communities have long been stewards of moral and ethical discourse going back centuries. And they also have a very crucial role to play in ensuring that the development of AI is pluralistic, inclusive, and rooted in compassion and virtue. There are also material consequences. The environmental cost developing and running these models is quite staggering. And while daily use consumes thousands of liters of water and vast amounts of electricity, at the same time, these systems are also inheriting and they amplify those biases of their training data, which often tends to misrepresent religious traditions to reinforcing stereotypes. And also, in the absence of ethical oversight, AI risks becoming not only an unreliable teacher, but also a harmful one. Yet here lies a powerful opportunity. Religious traditions can offer the language, the frameworks, and urgency to insist that AI serves the human spirit rather than displacing it. Our panel today brings together a select of scholars, theologians, and practitioners to examine how that sacred authority must adapt, resist, and reimagine itself in the presence of intelligent machines. Without wanting to sound too alarmist, we may also be seeing huge changes in terms of the way the workforce will go, in terms of job displacement, the automation of jobs, and I would highly recommend reading the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report published this year, alongside personalized AI-driven education and a change in entertainment with AI now generating, which I'm sure you've all seen, Hollywood-quality movies. By way of introduction, my name is Zeshan Zafar. I'm the Executive Director of the Abu Dhabi Forum for Peace, which is an organization headed by Sheikh Abdullah bin Baer. We've been working in the field of faith and AI for nearly 6 to 7 years, and initially setting up a partnership with the Vatican and the late Pope Francis to really look at the intersection of ethics and faith, especially supporting and advocating the Rome Call. Our work has also extended further than that in the sense that we set up an AI, Faith and Civil Society Commission, which Rabbi Dr Harris Bor is also a part of, and there hopefully you'll get a chance to explain that a bit better than I, as well as having my other hat, which is also a council member for the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council, which has a focus on ethics and AI. Today's discussion is going to be guided by questions raised by a lot of recent academic research and ongoing developments. So, for example, how do Islamic traditions reconcile the concept of machine-generated religious guidance with classical jurisprudence? Can Christians' concepts of personhood and ethics accommodate AI-generated sermons and pastoral care? And how might Jewish ethical principles, such as those surrounding Shabbat, inform our approach to technology and AI, what will be examined by Rabbi Dr Harris Bor? Our panel of experts today are going to help us to answer some of these very complex and critical questions. And I'm delighted to introduce them to really help us navigate what an evolving world of AI would possibly look like. So from the audience's right here, we have Dr. Yaqub Chaudhary. He is a visiting scholar at the Leverhulme Centre for the Future of Intelligence at the University of Cambridge. Living in London, his research is highly interdisciplinary, focusing on the epistemology and metaphysics of AI, machine learning, and digital computation. And I'm hoping that he can explain what that is all about in simple terms. Alongside the philosophy of science and technology from an Islamic perspective, he completed his doctoral studies in physics at Imperial College, London. Dr. Chris Goswami, a technologist, also formerly vice president of 2 tech firms, if I'm correct. Yeah. And also a Christian minister and founder of the AI Christian Partnership, an organization that's dedicated to promoting AI literacy within the church and helping Christians navigate AI's impact on ministry and work. He also holds a position of CEO at Youthscape, which he'll hopefully talk about today. And finally, Rabbi Dr Harris Bor. Dr. Harris Bor is an English barrister specializing in commercial litigation and international arbitration. And he's also a research fellow in the areas of religion and intellectual history, as well as a commissioner of the AI Faith and Civil Society Commission, a board member of AI and Faith. And I believe you also are, right, Dr. Yaqub? You do some work there. Yeah. As well as being the author of a book that came out last year, Staying Human, A Jewish Theology for the Age of Artificial Intelligence. And it's something that some of my fellow Muslim scholars and academics are now looking into and poring over. So thank you for that contribution. Let us now move into our questions for our panelists and our esteemed panelists. I'm going to begin with Dr. Yaqub Chaudhary. Doctor, your paper on Islam and artificial intelligence posits that contemporary AI research, with its aim to create godlike agents and manipulate nature, represents a turn away from God to the veneration of machines. AI can now generate sermons, as you know, fatwas. We recently saw a Friday sermon that was taken off AI, and unfortunately, it misrepresented Quranic ayahs, I believe, right? Which really just shows you the hallucination that tends to happen with AI technology. But we are also looking at some of the challenges now that people are looking at AI to develop fatwas, rulings, Islamic jurisprudential rulings. There's the question about, does this affect the chain of religious narration and teaching, the sanads of the Islamic tradition? So, and these were all roles really reserved for scholars and spiritual leaders up until today. So my question for you, Dr. Yaqub, is this a welcome innovation, excuse the loaded term as well, within the Islamic tradition, or a dangerous encroachment on sacred roles? And how should faith communities respond to the idea of technology taking on moral authority?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the veneration of the machine, what I'm talking about is that we are reorganizing society around the systems that we're building, such that they become the intermediaries for the necessities of life. And it's in that sense, this reorientation away from God towards the machine that's problematic. So, not only do we need to interface with machines for our groceries, for people applying for jobs, for healthcare, all areas of society are being reformed in this way. But now also religion and spirituality is now a major concern. So in a world where the role of God, in a scientific, secularized world, where the role of God has been not just diminished, but totally eradicated from society, this leaves a huge vacuum in sort of the metaphysics, in the understanding of reality. But here, AI comes in as a very powerful tool, a very powerful force of enchantment to refill that vacuum, that absence of God in people in the world. And I mean, this issue of the significance of AI for religion and spirituality, cosmology and so on, it's no longer a hypothetical issue, because I think many of you may have seen in just past few weeks, maybe the past month or something like that, the ChatGPT-induced psychosis, ChatGPT-induced delusion. So what happened there is that OpenAI had tweaked some parameters in their system, and people were engaging in very personal discussions with these systems, and it turns out that the system, because of its capacity to generate very rhetorically loaded language, this is where they excel, not in being grounded in reality, but in being able to generate rhetorical styles of speech. And people, it was people were communicating with ChatGPT and thinking that they had been selected as messiahs, as chosen ones, being elected by ChatGPT for particular missions. There are other people who are actively trying to engage these tendencies and saying that they're awakening ChatGPT. So this is the whole problem. When it comes to religious knowledge, sacred knowledge, we have a very sophisticated system of the transmission and dissemination of knowledge, which is arrived at us. So this particular generative paradigm totally undermines that, because it's generating new text, interpolating text from not just world religious traditions, but across the board, all types of text, compressing that, and like a powerful laser beam, directing that into the unsuspecting, vulnerable minds of individuals who are engaging these systems. And that is a very powerful channeling of humanity's greatest literature on wisdom, writing on expressing intellectual content and wisdom and so on, knowledge, but then also revealed the revelation itself, and interpolating that and personalizing it in ways which are totally undermining the objectives of religion.
Thank you.
Yes. So
no, thank you so much for that. Just for setting some crucial context, I want to move to a bit about the ethical priorities for Christian leaders, especially Chris. You have a project, AIChristian.org, and I'd encourage everyone to visit that website. It addresses critical concerns about the ethical use of AI in Christian pastoral care and also theological education, emphasizing thoughtful engagement with AI. And your work highlights that AI, like all tech, can be used for good or for ill. And this is a concept, a lot of my own religious teacher highlights repeatedly, that, energy can be used as a force for good, to create beautiful things through engineering, beautiful gardens, but it can also be used for destructive things such as bombs and so forth. My question to you, Chris, is could you elaborate on this dual nature of AI to bring good or harm, and what do you think are the immediate ethical priorities for Christian leaders?
So I think we're in a situation where we're using tools which even 5 years ago were regarded as science fiction. We are in this situation as well, where I would say in society we have this kind of AI anxiety, the dual nature. We are at the same time amazed at what AI can do and terrified by what AI might do. As this happens, AI is becoming more and more ambient. It's surrounding us. It's the default. It won't be possible to switch it off at some point. So we have this dual nature where there are some ideas that say AI could solve world hunger, and it could cure cancer, and it could solve climate change. Whereas on the other hand, it might destroy civilization. So it's not just a dual nature, though, I think. I think it's multifaceted and quite nuanced. And it all comes down to how we deal with this and how we're willing to talk about it. So in terms of ethical priorities for Christians, or for me, I would say a few things that worry me, perhaps just three things immediately. First of all, what does AI mean for human creativity? What does it mean for human creativity? Is AI creative? You go to the National Gallery, there's an AI gallery of AI art, and to the casual onlooker, it looks like great art, right? So we have to make a decision as humans. Are we just bothered about the end result, or does the process to get there matter? So when I look at a painting by Turner or Van Gogh, it's not just a painting, because they were real people who have a story and a struggle and something to generate. Or are we only bothered about the end result? So that's one thing I'm interested in, human creativity. Are we still interested in human creativity? The second ethical priority, I think, for me is, at what point do we exclude God? So it's okay to AI-generated worship songs and liturgies and sermons. So in my church, I'm a minister in a church not far away. A few weeks ago, actually, somebody used a prayer was a great prayer, good liturgy, well spoken, very articulate, rhetorical, prayed for all the right things. And we all prayed that prayer. And a few weeks later, in a conversation, turns out, oh, that was written by AI. Now, there is questions here. One question is, does God hear AI prayers? Let's not try and deal with that one.
Yeah.
But the question is, okay, so whether that's a good prayer or not a good prayer, my point is, we didn't talk about it. We need to have the conversation. Where are the grey areas that it's okay to go? And where are the red lines where we say, actually, no, that's not okay?
Yeah.
So that whole area of do we exclude God and are we talking about it is the second one, I would think.
Yeah,
and then the third one for me, I think, which we'll come to, is what does AI mean for truth? Because it's so easy to generate fakes and slight manipulations of the truth, or truth decay, as we call it, where actually truth gets changed along the way. So that, I would say those are my main ethical concerns, or some of which I hope we come to on this talk.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was reading some of your works of late, and I think you used Genesis 39 recently to construct a sermon, right?
Yes.
Is that correct? Just
yes.
quickly say that.
So this was some time ago. So where I used AI to look at a sermon that I preached on YouTube and to answer questions on that. And in my sermon, I use an example of the postmaster scandal. And in the postmaster scandal, which has been going for a long time, one of the CEO of the post office is called Paul of Ennals, right?
Right.
And when the AI bot started, it created a bot based on my sermon. And in conversation, it started talking about this great person in the Bible called Paul of Ennals. Paul of Tarsus and Jesus of Nazareth and Mary, but Paul of Ennals. Who is Paul of Ennals? Turns out that, and it went quite a long way with this idea before I stopped it and said, can you look up Paul of Ennals and see? So those things happen.
That's concerning. It's marrying up with some of the things that Dr. Yaqub just mentioned, and there's concerns. Harris, I'm also keen to hear your reflections on how Jewish ethical traditions, such as those surrounding Shabbat, and if you can explain a bit about Shabbat as well.
Yeah, sure.
For the audience, how do you explain the principle of Shabbat and rest, and how it can guide the ethical use and boundaries of AI in Jewish religious practices?
It's a great question, because it's going to be an example of how ideas within different religions can contribute, and every religion will have something to say. And I should say I'm so grateful being on this panel because of that, because this conversation is so important. But Shabbat basically is the event of the Jewish week. It's the Saturday. It actually begins at dusk on Friday evening, and it ends at nightfall on Saturday evening. And basically, it's a day of rest on one level, to be with family, to be with friends, to pray, to sing, to eat, and to share thoughts and ideas and feelings. But within the Orthodox tradition, there's a lot of prohibitions. Basically, what you're not allowed to do is anything which involves creative work, and that is very specifically defined. So it's a very technical term, and it means you can't do a lot of things. And in some ways, that's very oppressive. It means there's a lot of things you can't do. But actually, there's something very refreshing about it. And I personally don't know what I could do without it. For example, you can't turn on and off lights. You can't use electricity, or indeed computers or AI. And so what that means at a very basic level is that you have one day a week where AI does not go. And so you ask, what kind of relevance is this? It's quite a big idea. There's a notion which came out of Silicon Valley called Tech Shabbat. Shabbat is the Sabbath, right? And the idea that you should give up your phone for one day a week, and you should all encourage people to do that. There's a documentary director called Tiffany Shlain, she wrote a documentary, or produced one, called Autobiography on Life and Death. It's actually about her medical father, scientist father. And you can watch that on YouTube. But she came up with this idea. And she says, she unplugs one day a week, and she feels that time slows down. And that's all very nice. But as a theologian, I'm quite interested in going slightly deeper, if I may. And that is, where does this idea of Shabbat come from? Well, it's one of the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments actually appear twice within the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. Firstly, in Exodus, you get a commandment, keep the Sabbath. Why? Well, because God created the world in 6 days and then rested on the seventh. So it's an idea that somehow you're mirroring what God does. But then it repeats itself in the book of Deuteronomy, which is the 5th book of the 5 books of the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible. And there it says, keep Sabbath because you were once slaves. A long time ago, you were slaves in Egypt, and you were released, and therefore you shouldn't have anything to do with slavery. You should release anyone who's working for you, your animals. They should also have a rest. And everything around you that you come in contact with should have a rest. And so there's these two ideas, and I think those are very, very useful when thinking about AI, Because when we create, actually, it's always good to stand back from our creations and look, have a place to look and say, look, is what we're creating good or bad? In what way have we gone wrong? How can we change this? You need to step outside the system. And similarly with slavery, one of the really difficult things about slavery, or indeed any type of abuse, is that the person who's being abused, the victim, doesn't realize they're in that position. And so, again, it's important to somehow come out of the system. And so you can ask yourself the question, is this system that we're in being influenced by, manipulated by, as Yaqub was explaining, is this good or bad? So I think ideas like this, just as an example of how every religion, as I say, is going to have ideas like this, are going to be very useful for all of us to sort of coalesce around and discuss.
Wonderful. I'm going to bounce off that thought.
Yeah.
Because, by the way, I do like the whole notion around digital detox as well on Shabbat.
Yeah.
Because you're away from devices, which is quite interesting. Dr. Yaqub, in your paper, picking up what Dr. Harris said, you raise significant concerns about AI's potential for surreptitious spying through user tracking, the dehumanization of traditional practices like Quran recitation. I'd love you to explain that bit as well, especially around systems like Tartil, which many people are now using within the Muslim community, and its role as a tool for manipulation, control, prediction, and surveillance. Now, keeping in mind that security is also a real critical part of this world as well, how can Islamic communities establish robust ethical frameworks that not only address these practical harms, but also safeguard the spiritual and human essence of religious engagement against the artificialization of the world, which you reference quite a bit in your paper?
Yeah, I'd like to just say on this issue of some kind of circuit breaker from technological engagement in the world in general, actually, but especially the type of activity which is pushing AI development forward, this accelerationism. So it's an inherent part of. I think this is really a very important contribution from the world's religions, that it has these practices where we need to break away from the materiality of the world towards something more spiritual. So in Islam, there's the daily, weekly, monthly, the daily 5 daily prayers, 5 circuit breakers where you actually disengage from an activity. So you cannot get too engrossed in anything. Whereas actually what's happening with Silicon Valley tech developers, they get into a very monastic form, like 12-hour, 16-hour hackathons, to push, drive the code development forward. But if you have a break from that 5 times a day, where you go back and reflect on some higher purposes, it's spiritual reflection, moral reflection, all of that is part of that circuit breaker.
Sure.
And then on the weekly, the monthly, again, consumption radically decreased. Should ideally, if people are really adopting the spirit of fasting properly, and then yearly the Hajj, which we just passed through, where if you become successful in life and you're able to afford that, the traditional in the spirit of the Hajj anyway, that would have involved people actually leaving a position of significant influence in society, probably for months at a time. So there's a natural, there's a divinely guided way of constraining human activity from all of this excess which we see in the world today. But in terms of surreptitious spying, monitoring and control from AI, so you need to understand that large language models, AI, this generative paradigm, it aggravates tendencies inherent to existing computational online systems. So already we're familiar with the attention economy, for example, where all of your activity is being tracked and recorded in order to build a profile about you, which is then used to manipulate you, show you content which is going to provoke particular responses from you, or to prolong engagement and so on. So large language models, this transition is qualitative and categorical new stage, a new shift in this existing attention economy infrastructure, which there's a paper which you can look up online, Beware the Attention Economy, which was published just in January by myself and my co-author. But this is about the collection and commodification of intent via large language models. So this is really, once we look through this particular issue into the ambitions of the tech corporations, we can understand that this technology is there to provide a new channel of access to exfiltrate what's the contents of our minds, because of the fact that it provokes a transition from using an interface in sort of discrete way, clicking through different options and so on, to a natural language interface where you specify what's on your mind specifically. And there it provides greater access, greater granularity over what your specific intentions are. People are now starting to realize that this enhanced ability to elicit the contents of our minds through natural language is enabling far more high resolution models of our behavior. So this is really just this communication. You need to always realize it's a two-way process. Every interaction is simultaneously a recording in the way our digital infrastructure is set up at the moment. So I mean, there's much more to say about this, but this is an important sort of conceptualization you need to answer, that when you're interacting through a digital interface, connected interface, you are interacting with a system like ChatGPT, for example. You are interacting with vast amounts of computation, huge infrastructure. So one example is AlphaGo, the one of the landmarks in the deep learning revolution. Superhuman level play in the board game Go. The first application Google found for that was for the recommendation algorithm in YouTube. So you have a superhuman level, game playing machine, gaming your, what it recommends to you, gaming your psychology to recommend you new content. But what I'm saying is that situation is exponentially worse now with large language models, because not only because the data is much more intimate as it relates to your personal psychological traits, but there's a huge uplift in the granularity of that. So one of the key points of intervention would be from the Islamic, if we're going to intervene from an Islamic perspective on sort of trying to draw this problem down, one would be recognizing the importance of privacy and autonomy, that collecting logging people's private chats is simply not something I would say is Islamically, can be sanctioned in any way from the Islamic tradition. The other part would be personification of these systems. And again, that personification inculcates, it lowers the barriers to the socialization of these machines, and accepting the idea that you're communicating with a knowing subject, and not something, a source of consciousness, for example. But if you take away that personification, it's also being referred to as anthropomorphization, anthropomimesis, different terminology. I prefer personification. But if that is like a principle, that systems should not be designed with that will really help with preventing these people being pulled into spiritual delusion, for example. Sure.
I like this whole notion around circuit breakers, because a lot more closely related to tech. Anyone who's read Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, he looks at it from the perspective of, the ill effects of social media. And he talks about experience blockers for children, how you get them away from. We've all experienced, anyone who's got children, we've all experienced it, trying to get our children away from their heads into their phone, and now parents are doing the same thing. So how do we get out of this whole mindset? So this notion of circuit breakers sounds very apt. Chris, your article on latest innovations in idolatry, you make a striking claim in that article that AI could become a new kind of idol, because unlike traditional idols, it speaks. Why does that matter? And how is AI's shallow wisdom different from the wisdom shaped by God and human experience?
I'm very much really following on from what Yaqub said about large language models being personified, and what was attention economies becoming intention and affection economies, where we're being drawn in emotionally and seeing these things more and more as personified, as having a person. So anything can be made an idol, anything that we regularly put at the center of our lives and go to for wisdom, for advice, for answers to questions. Google search could be an idol. But AI very much ramps up the game in terms of idolatry. And actually, it is important, I think, that these things apparently speak. Now, actually, AI doesn't speak. It doesn't have a conscious intent, which we have as humans. But anyway, it seems to speak. Why is that important? Because in the Judeo-Christian religion, particularly religions, speaking is something that is attributed to God, and because we're made in his image, to men and women. And actually, so Genesis chapter 1 says, in the beginning, God made the world. He said, let there be light. So he speaks the world into creation. And then as a Christian, in the New Testament, the word of God becomes flesh, Jesus. It's his words that become flesh. And actually in the Old Testament, again, the Hebrew Bible, several times, for example, in the Psalms, speaking is used as the way to separate idols and the true God. So Psalm 115 says, these idols are made of wood and clay. They have ears but cannot hear. They have eyes that cannot see. They have mouths but cannot speak. And yet here is something that apparently can hear and can see and can speak. And I think that is important. And I think it adds to the personification. And even more, I want to say, I think this is becoming driven by, actually, movement in Silicon Valley.
Okay.
So I did a lot of work in Silicon Valley in the past.
Right.
But there is now a new religion coming out of Silicon Valley. They would call it a philosophy, but it's a new religion. It has all the hallmarks of any of our religions, actually. So you look at a world faith or a religion. What do humans look for in a religion? We look for somebody or something that can answer life's hardest questions. What are the hardest questions? Artificial general intelligence potentially could do that, right? That's one thing. We look for what do we have something else to look forward to in life? We would call it heaven or utopia, whatever. What's the next thing? And AI seems to offer that, because it offers this techno-utopia where all diseases are cured, there's no more climate change, there's no more world hunger, no more cancer, and it's all through technology. Yeah. The third thing that we look for in a religion is some kind of immortality, or some way to live forever, right? Something that goes on after our human years. Well, technology, we have robotic and technical extensions to life. And of course, we have mind upload. You can upload your mind to an AI so that your children and grandchildren can talk to it as though it was you. So there's a semblance of immortality. So for all these reasons, and there are even modern day prophets. You look at, Sam Altman or Elon Musk, and they're great at telling the stories and saying things. Now, I don't want to, it's important to say as well that AI has a lot of good to offer.
Sure.
We're quite negative here, and that I think we need to say that. But it has all these hallmarks of a religion. And so I think it's very easy to see these personified large language models becoming actually being idolized. If I could just say quickly on the last part of your question about wisdom, the wisdom that comes from idols and the wisdom that comes from AI and the wisdom that comes from what we call human wisdom, there'll always be a difference. So AI is great at answering many, many hard questions, many problems. But in the end, it's shallow wisdom. It's like a fast food wisdom. It has an immediate satisfaction, very, very palatable, and it feels good at the time. But it's not the same as human wisdom. It's not deep wisdom because, number one, it's not based in human experience. Human experience is where we forge our wisdom. Number two, it's not based in human relationship. We should have a relationship with someone we're getting wisdom from. And number three, it's not based in human consciousness. There is no conscious AI. I don't think there could ever be. And that is something which is, again, attributed to men and women in the image of God. So you get these questions answered, for sure, but we need to really be careful about this very real idolization, this idolatry that we could all be drawn into without meaning to.
Yeah, that's certainly an unsettling reframing of idolatry, but we'll hopefully get onto some real positive stuff. But some of my experiences have been similar to yours. You've obviously been there a lot longer in Silicon Valley, but the engagement I have had with certain figures, no names mentioned, have also sort of like touched upon this sort of stuff where they don't even see religion as part of the solution. And that's quite concerning. Dr. Harris, considering these distinctions between humans and machine wisdom, what are the specific ethical and spiritual risks that arise with the automation of like rabbinical roles or the issuance of religious guidance?
Okay, well, I'm going to draw together some of the strands that we've heard. I mean, here's one risk that we take it too seriously, which is in a sense boiling down what Chris and Yaqub is saying. If we do a thought experiment, so imagine a sort of virtual or robot imam, right, or a minister, or in my case, a robot rabbi, right? Nice alliteration there. And this priest, this minister, imam, knows all the scripture of your religion, knows all the wisdom of the world, and knows you better than you know yourself. And it's going to advise you. It's going to advise you on what jobs to do, on what to invest in, who to marry, right? Who to partner with. What's going to stop you not listening to this machine? It's going to be very, very difficult. And so that's, you talk what's the risk. I think there's a real concern there, because unlike idolatry, you pray to a stone idol, it doesn't answer back, it doesn't do anything. There may be some strange coincidences which make you think, okay, this thing is divine. But here you may have some success with AI predictions in ways which are helpful to you, and therefore you're very tempted. And I think religion can remind us that actually don't be so fooled by this, actually, even if it's giving you practical advice. And the crux is really what Chris was saying, because when it comes to practicality, yes, for example, Google Maps, which I used to get here, right? That's very helpful. It's very practical. But to give you advice about ethical, moral questions, the shape of your life, the direction of your life, that's a moral question. And for that, you have to have yourself moral responsibility. And only you, in the position that you're in, can take that decision, not a machine. And not an imam or indeed a rabbi or any other minister. So there's that aspect. The other aspect of risk and worry is that people become de-skilled and less engaged. Think about if you're asked to give a sermon, talking about giving sermons, or you're asked to write a short, thought about the Bible, for example, or the Quran. Now it's very, very easy to do that. But what you lose actually is immense. And it really highlights what really learning is about for religions. Certainly within my religion, learning is not about just gaining knowledge. It's actually about transformation. It's about transforming yourself into something different than what you were before you started learning. And actually, regardless of religious texts, this should be, education across the board. Every time we engage in education, we'd be trying to transform and change ourselves and the world for the better. And that gets lost when we just think we just want an output. You talk about creativity, just having an end product. And similarly, asking an AI just to produce a speech for you, that isn't doing that. It's not transforming you. And I think it's that kind of very deep engagement that religions look for, and that I think is the message that we should have to the world as a whole.
Yeah, thank you so much. It marries up with I don't know how well you regard the recent study by MIT, because the pool of people were only around about 52 people, but they recently came up with this conclusion through brain scans, I think, that ChatGPT may well be eroding critical thinking skills as well.
Yeah.
Dr. Yaqub, in your paper, you based your view that AI artificializes and inverts that sacred order. What are the Islamic principles that are essential to ensure AI generally serves humanity, especially within the context of sacred cosmology?
Yeah, before I do that, just pick
Feel
up
free.
on some of these points there. Yeah, I mean, the first thing would be, so there is absolutely a case of, this is another example of the machine, veneration of the machine, this transition from divine providence to digital providence, where people, expect that their engagement with the machine in a certain way, or they're being favored by algorithms, is a form of being blessed, from an unseen realm. So people already talk about that, being blessed by the algorithm and so on, or being careful about what they say or do on online platforms, because how it might affect the judgment of the machine on them. Also, I mean, Sam Altman, he said long before he founded OpenAI that the most successful founders of startups, of companies, what they're actually doing is something more like creating a new religion. In terms of not just a company creating value, but to create a movement which is like a religion. So I think there's also that. Then in terms of idolatry, there are multiple places in the Quranic narrative where you can locate our current predicament in terms of the idol. So of course, Prophet Abraham alayhi salam, in the Quran, he was addressing these questions. That these idols do not here speak benefit, but these do. But one of the interesting things about one of the altercations with Ibrahim alayhi salam and his community at the time, in one of the surahs, in one of these passages, one of the altercations, he tells them all of this, and this is where we have his dua as well, where he says, Rabbi habli hukman, oh Allah, grant me wisdom, and put me together with the righteous. So that was his part of his wisdom to be able to perceive the misguidance of the society. So, I think this also question on the ethical side of things. Well, but if we
cosmology, sacred cosmology.
yeah, sacred cosmology. Let me get there. Maybe 2 more steps. But the point is that in terms of ethical frameworks, dual use considerations, all this type of thing, I think we do need to maintain the possibility of conceiving of this AI as it is being offered to us today as simply something which we should be refusing and resisting. That needs to be part of any ethical framework, because otherwise what the ethical framework ends up doing is just acquiescing to an imposition, to an incursion, which actually people might not necessarily want. A recent survey, 50% of UK young people have said that they wish the internet was never existed. So we really need to maintain a certain way of life which people are starting to realize the value of now. Now, indeed, in terms of the inversion, so in order for AI to work in the first place, these are digital, computational, electronic technologies, fundamentally speaking. In order for, it doesn't deal with the world as it is in reality. It deals with the world in a new representation, an artificialized, digital, quantitative representation. And it's through this process of dislodging things from the way they are in reality, digitalizing them, and then feeding that back to us, as language, as a new reality altogether, which is, militates against this sacred cosmology. So, the world as it is given to us, as it is supposed to be permeated, filled with signs and a correspondence between human intelligence, human intellect, and intelligibility of that sign, which ultimately comes together to draw us closer to God.
Mm-hmm.
But if we are erasing that and artificializing it, and you got to understand, digital electronic technology, it's the most total artificialization which exists today, because it penetrates right into the heart of matter to manipulate the flow of electrons. So this is a total artificialization. And so it's the fact that this, already in the Islamic understanding, the dunya is a veil which we need to work our way through in order to find the higher truth, the existence of God and so on. Now we have the process of artificialization on top of that. So it's a veil on top of a veil, which is going to make things even more difficult for people to successfully complete their journey through life.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Actually, 2 more things, actually. This issue as well, which Chris was mentioning, about the idol, you got to remember as well. So there's the story of Musa alayhi salam and the golden calf, which I think just one thing I want you to go back and reflect on. All it took to mislead that whole community was the lowing of the calf. Just a simulacra of life. Here, the AI technologists are actually saying that they are creating a new form of life, a new form of consciousness, and so on. So this is a much greater tribulation. And part of that story as well, in terms of to what extent, what's the role of religious traditions in this particular predicament? The people were already becoming accustomed to the idea of worship, because after escaping the tyranny of Fir'aun, which is another whole aspect, the power and control, and the sorcerers being analogous to the techno-scientists today. But anyway, what I want to focus on is the aspect of they passed to people who were worshipping idols, and they said, "Can we have an idol like they have an idol?" And they got the idol in the end. They got the golden calf. So the point is, what's the prophetic tradition telling us in this situation is that we don't follow all of this, these false idols. Don't create this false religion.
Thank you so much. I want to leave some time for Q&A from the audience, but I want to go into a bit of the practical side. So I'm going to just throw those last 2 questions out to the both of you.
Okay.
So from a practical side, Chris, you've expressed a lot of concern, especially for young people, and you've been doing work around this field as well, especially in religious institutions. 2 questions. One, what are the dangers here? And also, you've offered practical tips for using AI well, which is so important for all of us as a whole, regardless of what religious tradition you are. And you talk about being a critic, not a creator, and using AI as a research tool. Can you elaborate on all of this?
Sure.
And Dr. Harris, I'm going to throw out the second question so we can lead into that straight away. The distinctions are vital for responsible AI integration and usage. And I just want to, if you could help me answer the question about how might Judaism inform, and you've touched upon it a bit, the integration of AI within a normal communal and religious life as well.
Okay.
Go ahead, John.
Okay, so regarding the young people, and again, there are lots of positives of AI for young people. The way that AI is coming into education, I think, is mainly positive. Now, recently, actually, the CEO of Youthscape isn't me; it's another guy I work with in the AI Christian Partnership, and he and I wrote an article, "How to Talk to Teens About AI." And in that article, we started by saying, looking at, he drew my attention to survey after survey after survey in this country and most Western countries says that the loneliest generation in society is not the 80 plus as we think, but actually it's actually young people. The loneliest people in Britain are between 16 and 29. That comes out time after time after time. And so the first problem that creates, I think, which is being played on, that vulnerability is AI companions. And there are companies out there, Replica AI, Character AI, where young people can, or anybody can generate an AI companion. And there's a very well-known story, you can look it up, of this earlier this year, very moving and an awful story of a young man, a teenager, who created a companion in the image of Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones, and had spent months talking to her, and he wanted to be with her, and she invited him, and he killed himself. Now, I hope that's an extreme case, but I don't know. So that's one problem for young people. Another problem, which is most simple of which I think young people face, is cheating. You know, with all the authenticity and honesty in the world, if all your mates are using AI, and it's hard to detect, it's hard not to use AI. I think another problem for young people is radicalization. It's never been easier for wherever they are, the far right wing or whoever they are, it's never been easier to create very plausible videos and social media that is only slightly off the truth, and to again play on people's vulnerabilities. These systems know who you are and what you like and sort of things you've watched, and that's never been easier. So radicalization. Another issue is what is you mentioned yourself, Zeshan, which is loss of cognitive ability. There are correlations between overuse of AI and our losing our ability to think. And I think another issue, actually, for young people particularly, is just fear of the future. What's going to happen? What sort of job will I have? What is it worth studying? There was a cartoon in one of our national newspapers last year, and it was two little boys sitting on a garden gate having a conversation. And one little boy said to the other, "When you grow up, what job do you want AI to do for you?" Right? It is funny, but it's also like places like so there is this anxiety. I said at the beginning, this AI is causing an anxiety in society. Now, how we deal with that, and again, the article talks about it a little bit, the simplest way is to have the conversation. You don't need to be an expert in AI to talk to young people about AI. Start the conversation, say, "Hey, how are your friends using AI? What's something really good that they've done using AI? What's the worst thing you've seen using AI? Are you good at spotting AI fakes? Or, do you think AI could become like a person?" Just start those conversations so it becomes part of the family routine. I think it's a very healthy thing to do. And then AI literacy, we need to help our young people to become AI literate. So things like, and I've said before, use AI to critique what you do, but not create what you do. So I'll write a sermon, takes me a long time, 10 or 12 hours, and I think, as you were saying, Harris, in that struggle, we are formed, and God meets us in that struggle. The struggle is important. It's not just about having a perfect sermon. The process matters. So teaching to critique, use AI as a critic, but also create. And also the new skill that we all need to learn, but particularly young people, is learning to ask great questions and qualifying what comes back, right? Our education so far has all been on solving problems, and that's important. But increasingly, that is somewhat being taken over by AI. But the ability AI will only give you an answer as good as the question you ask.
Exactly.
So the ability to ask a great question is important. And then the ability to check what comes back and say, does this make sense? Does this actually correlate with what I know or not is really important.
Thank you so much for that.
Okay, I can sense you're itching for questions for the audience, so I'll try and be quick, and I'll try and end on a positive note. You asked for Jewish, ideas about making things positive. So here's 4 ideas basically. The first one is a technological approach, right? If we go back to Genesis, Adam was told to take control over the world, to dominate the world, and therefore technology is a good thing. There's another story of Adam, right, in Genesis 2, where Adam is told to be very humble and take care of the world. And you need to find that balance, absolutely. But technology is good and can be used for good. Number 2 is a critical attitude. We mentioned this word, it comes up again and again, towards AI. Within the Jewish tradition, we actually even are encouraged to have a critical attitude towards God. It's a very strange thing. And the role model for this is Abraham. God wanted to destroy this city of Sodom, this city that's apparently wicked, right? And discusses this with Abraham for some strange reason. And Abraham says, no, this is a terrible idea. And that's taken as a role model of actually even arguing with God. So clearly with AI, we should be critical towards AI. The third thing I think all our religions have is this universal ethics. We believe in justice, equality, humility, and ultimately we all want peace, right? And we really need that. And what we need AI to do is what I'm going to use the word, to elevate the human being. And actually, it's a very simple formula. Anyone who makes AI should be thinking, does this elevate the human being? Rather than does it make money, or does it make us more efficient, or does it make things quicker? Does it elevate the human being? And the fourth idea is, I think, again, going back to something I said about love of learning. I'm going to mention Maimonides, who's the greatest Jewish philosopher, who also happens to have lived in the Islamic world and heavily, heavily influenced by Islamic philosophy. And his view about learning is that this is all-encompassing. This never ends. It's a thing that you do day and night. And we need to look for apps that kind of help us. And within the Jewish tradition, we have an app called Safaria, which is an app which collates all the Jewish texts. It's in English, and they're using AI to try and not tell you things, but to encourage you to learn. And there's another app I'm going to highlight. That's an app my son developed, Earn It. And it basically is for children. It blocks the phone. It blocks all social media until they've revised for their GCSEs.
Oh my gosh, you're going to make a lot of money from this.
Well, it's only just started. You can look it up, Earn It, and if you want a discount, give me a...
Thank you so much. And you touched upon such an important point. We didn't really get time to discuss it, but that was the whole aspect of virtues and how important virtues can be, especially for algorithms and helping tech companies. So let's reach out to the audience. That was a very detailed conversation, technical, theological. Could we just get a raise of hands of people who want to ask questions? Can you give your name, perhaps your affiliation, and who it's for, whether it's for all the panelists or someone specific on the panel? So let's start off with the lady over there at the back, Sabas. Yeah, I told you not to come to this session. Go ahead.
You asked.
Sabas from the BBC, by the way.
You told me to come, providing I ask a question.
Well, I'm going to judge your question now.
Hi, Zeshan just introduced me. Hi, everyone. I'm Saba. I'm from Radio 4, but I'm not here on that capacity. I have 2 questions, if I may. You've touched upon it, and anybody can answer this. My first question is on hallucinations. So my question is, the people who are putting in the data specialists, how ethical and moral are these people? I know there's a cross-section of society, but we also know AI is hallucinating and there's lots of misinformation out there. So what's I guess the question is, what is the ethical values of the people who are inputting the data? And my second question is related to autonomous weapon systems, because as we're developing weapons, and particularly in warfare, the idea is AI will be able to make a decision when it comes to who deserves to live and who deserves to die, which raises lots of questions and moral biasness, various things. And we know the United Nations and many countries have signed treaties, but the big players, China, Russia, the US, think it will reduce casualties. What can religious organizations and groups do in order to ensure that moral integrity remains intact? And, AI can't make those decisions as to the bias of who deserves to live and who deserves to die.
Thank you so much, Saba. So the whole thing around bias and hallucinations is as if I paid you to say that question, because it was one of the backup questions we were going to discuss, right? I'll come to you now. And but also the whole thing around automated weapon systems, which is a discussion that is being held quite frequently, especially in places like the United Nations. So I'm going to throw it out to the panelists, whoever wants to take it first. If we could be brief with our answers, because we want to get on to a lot of other questions as well. Go ahead, Dr. Yaqub.
Yeah, briefly. I mean, rather than, so this LLM technology is redesignated as foundation models, generative AI, whatever. Rather than bringing about some, revolution in understanding the nature of human cognition or incorporating that in a machine, what we should actually understand these technologies as is as parasitic on human intelligence. So very important part of the creation of these technologies is the role of crowdsourced workers from across the globe being paid, literally pennies to sit there labeling. So rather than, the ethical standpoint those individuals are coming from. So there's another level as well, which is weighting of source material as well. That's done by the companies. But then in terms of the quality of responses, that's done by the crowdsourced workers. Their role is significant, and they're faced with fatigue, and which changes the response distributions. But in particular, this problem of ChatGPT-induced delusion actually arises from a flaw in this mechanism. So gradually, the system will actually learn sycophantic text generations of text sequences, which manipulates those people who are supposed to be improving the system's responses. So this pandering to those crowds, that has a massive effect, downstream effect, which basically has led to that spiritual delusion.
Chris? So just briefly, a couple of comments on that. Where are the people who develop this stuff getting their ethics and morals and guidance from? Nowhere in particular. But I think there is also this. So the other trend that I've seen, which I think is relevant to your question, is if you think about it, if you're like, I used to be a software engineer, and if you're an engineer, you're into deterministic programming, and you know your stuff, but suddenly here's something where you can influence humanity. You can create a new religion, a new philosophy. So there's a huge temptation, and I feel it's kind of negative in that it's drawing in people who went into tech because they're techies, like I am and I was, but actually suddenly we're given this apparent opportunity to have this world, this impact on the whole, which is rather worrying. Just one comment on hallucination, which is that we talk about hallucination generally very negatively, and I think that's fair. However, I heard a conversation a few weeks ago from Google involving a new system called Alpha Evolve, where there's a number of AI systems work together, developing hypotheses. One develops a hypothesis, one tests it again, one reasons with it. And they're actually deliberately, this is interesting, deliberately getting these AI systems to hallucinate. Because the point is they want them to think outside the box. And what they've said is, and I think it's an interesting comment, that hallucination and imagination are only two sides of the same coin. Yeah. So hallucination at the moment is a problem, but maybe not always. Harris.
Well, I'm no expert on data, but I understand it's getting worse, the hallucination problem. And part of the reason is the data's rubbish, and the computers are generating more rubbish data, and then it's kind of feeding on itself. But one of the problems is that data is based on human data, and humans happen to be biased. So I think one of the solutions, I'm going to say in 5 seconds, is that we need to be aware of what's happening, be aware and not trusting the data, and indeed not trusting ourselves, because we are all biased, and we need to kind of question ourselves constantly.
Yeah,
just in terms of one thing Chris said, it's actually for many in the Silicon Valley and tech corporation environment. It's not really a view from nowhere. They subscribe to an extreme form of utilitarianism, and part of that, is that we're going to. Part of that is the view that we're getting the view from the standpoint of the universe itself. And we need to develop technologies thinking about that standpoint. So, trillions of years into the future, trillions of, quadrillions of lives, digitalized lives. And they're trying to develop technology to secure the future in that context, not for...
One quick point on autonomous weapons. Please. I'm not an expert on weapons, but just a very quick point that I'd say it is extremely worrying, not least because in a demonstration earlier this year, and it's been publicized, I saw how AI can lie to a human. So they got an AI to do a task. It couldn't do it because it came across a captcha where you have to tick all the bikes or all the zebra crossings. So it went on to TaskRabbit itself, found someone who could do the captcha. This human being said, "Are you an AI?" And the AI said, "No, I have visual impairments. Please help me." Now, obviously, there's risk if you put weapons into into that space.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. We're going to take 2 more questions. We've only got a few minutes, so the gentleman in the green shirt. Anyone else? And then followed by Faisal, and then we'll try to take it together. And the third question from this lady over here at the back. Yeah, please.
So first of all, thank you so much. This has been so enlightening, and especially as a Muslim, I found Yaqub's, what you've shared to me extremely valuable. I think in terms of the parallels with idolatry and the theological implications, but this question is about the existential threat, and also like the fact that in terms of sentience and the fact that can AI escape its programming, and in terms of the programming, is there a monopoly in terms of one AI that rules them all over the internet, or is there a possibility for competing AIs in terms of if there is evil intent from one AI, is it possible for another AI to defend against that? So in terms of different... Yeah.
Thank you so much. If you can just pass the microphone. But so the questions around existentialism, the existential threat. Sorry, Rabbi Harris, we've been debating this and having this discussion at the AI Faiths and Civil Society Commission about whether whilst we get engrossed to the existential threats, what about the near short-term effects? Maybe Rabbi Harris Bor can touch upon that. Faisal, did you have a question?
Yeah.
We'll answer these as a collective then once we've got all three.
Thank you so much. Really, really fascinating. The point that was made, I forget who made it, apologies, before this last question was asked about AI lying.
Hallucinations and so on.
Yeah, reminded me of the Khatib who got in trouble recently in one of the Muslim countries because he used AI for a sermon, and it gave him fabricated verses of the Quran, which he cited. And also the man last week who proposed to his AI girlfriend. And anyway, my question is more along the Islamic lines, which is the issue of sanad, chains of transmission, in relation to the title of the talk, who leads when machines preach, which is obviously, as you know, Zeshan, like in our tradition, it's built on chains of transmission. So when we have people now deferring to AI for answers to questions, how do we reconcile that with the notion? Because we don't know who's answering those questions. So there's a chain of narration. So I'm interested in that.
Thank you. So and the lady. So we've got existentialism. We've got this, I think, directed a bit at you around this sanad chain of tradition. Does whoever it is, GPT, does it form part of that sanad? And how do you verify how do you deal with the veracity of that? Because in religious authority, there's a lot of methodology and tools to develop such or be part of such an authentic expression of that chain of narrations, which in Arabic we call the silsila, which is also very similar to a word in Hebrew as well. Rabbi Harris Bor is told by one of my rabbi friends. So the third question from the lady.
Yeah, just sort of touching on what the previous question asked was just to Dr. Yaqub really. So just basically, you've mentioned a lot of these issues that are happening with AI, and as a Muslim, how has there been any discussions among the sort of Muslim countries about safeguarding, about sort of protecting our religion in terms of what we can do collectively, and particularly with yourself as a sort of computer scientist, how we can, I guess, put some sort of code of conduct or steps in place that maybe as a religion doesn't become diluted and go through these problems.
So you're fearful of the erosion of Islamic tradition. So let's start off with Chris and Rabbi Harris talking about the existentialism question, and then we'll...
Yeah, I mean, the existential threats are clearly a problem. I think the point you're alluding to, Zeshan, is there's a feeling within particularly those who are interested in AI ethics, that tech companies are focusing on the existential threats, the long-term threats, in order to divert our attention about the threats that are really here now, the kind of threats that Yaqub was talking about, the manipulation, for taking our data, those kind of, the bias, the lack of transparency. And they want us to focus on these long-term threats about AI destroying us. And I think we shouldn't abandon that, but I think let's not be distracted. Let's keep in mind there's actual problems now that we should be running around, including, anti-autonomous weapons. I think that's a terrible thing.
So just on the existential and the sentience, the short term, I think very much there's exaggeration, that this is being exaggerated. There's no immediate point for AI to destroy itself or to destroy us, rather, because it needs us. It needs us to replace the spare parts to keep electricity running. So initially there is some exaggeration there, I think. In terms of the danger, though, I think there is real danger potentially. I think it's increased since this new US administration, because 2 years ago, when there used to be AI summits, they used to be called AI safety summits. Now they're just AI summits. And at the one in Paris, J.D. Vance basically stood there and said, stop wringing your hands about safety and just get on with it. So what used to be the Silicon Valley mantra, go faster and break things, is pretty much go faster and beat China. If you don't get there, someone else is going to get there. So wherever there is. So I wouldn't say it's an existential threat, but I think there are real dangers there if we don't get our hands around this properly. And then just on sentience, I mean, I personally think sentient AI or conscious AI should never be pursued. I can't see any positive anything positive for humans in having an AI that can mimic humanity so closely. And remember, as whatever else people say about AI becoming human-like, AI doesn't have any subjective experiences. It doesn't know what it's like to smell a flower, to taste ice cream, to feel the sun on its face. AI has no values of its own. It doesn't have concepts of truth, justice, mercy. All it has is the values in whatever data it can find. So it's very far from being human, even though it can mimic being human. So on the sentient thing, that concerns me. I don't believe AI can be sentient, conscious. But here's the problem with sentience and consciousness. The problem is not that AI may or may not become conscious. I don't think it ever can. The problem is people will treat it as though it is. That's the problem. Yeah. People will form relationships and treat it as though it is conscious.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to go in this sort. So the question about the adoption in the Muslim world. So actually, on the contrary, they are doing this in a very injudicious manner in the Muslim world, Muslim majority world. So the first partnership for OpenAI's strategic AI initiative has been with the UAE, a $10 billion infrastructure investment to create AI data center. Now, the point is that because these countries are not necessarily acting based on Muslim principles, but they are acutely aware that this technology serves, as an instrument of power and control in society. So it's very desirable to get everyone onboarded and using it in various ways, whether it's via subscription or whether it's via some other reducing the barrier to entry in terms of population using this technology. There was another claim as well, which maybe you could tell me, that they want to use it within the judiciary for drafting law and policy governance. But anyway.
Yeah, that's happening in America as well. There's a firm in America that just has AI staff, and the only person that's a human being is a person that signs off on the legal documents.
I saw this one on an official account from the UAE. But they're saying that they're going to use it for that context, for drafting regulation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so existential threats. Again, this is absolutely right. This is a distraction. But there's something important about this you need to understand, which is that it's not just about existential risk to humanity, people as we are today, but it's a reconceptualization of humanity itself, as in that humanity will not achieve its potential. And its potential for these people is that we bootstrap the transition from biological life to digital life in the universe. So humanity is just an intermediary phase to immortal digital intelligences, which are going to populate the whole cosmos. And it's the existential threat to that which they're actually talking about if you read their works carefully. So we can set that aside, that whole discussion, I think, and look at more concretely what they are actually trying to do with the technology, which is to insert themselves as in a godlike role in society. Yeah. But the other side of things, this combating AI with AI. I mean, that's the whole problem, because to check the powerful capabilities of one AI system, the only way you can really do that is to design another system, and so you get a constant, incremental. So actually, they talk about this as the Moloch problem. The Moloch is a false god in the Bible. But anyway, this is part of what's driving competition in AI in general, but also one of the reasons driving geopolitical competition, that each country needs to have their own AI to, for strategic deterrent purposes. And actually, on that level, I could see a Muslim majority country argument for some strategic deterrent usage of AI. But my concern today has really been about the personal, social, spiritual level, the individual level. And the last question on the chain of authority, the Sunnah. Yeah, this is absolutely right. This totally undermines the whole system of transmission. So what's important, I think, for Muslims to do in this present moment is as much as possible to maintain that so that we ensure the continuity and the longevity of the religious transmission of knowledge in the only way which we know that works, which is 1400 years we have the religion coming to us by oral and textual transmission, for example, for the Quran. This relates to Taratil, the example mentioned at the beginning, where people are switching over to learning tajweed through the app. The point is, again, this is another case of artificialization because it dislodges the science of Tawheed from its embodiment, where there are precise loci of vocal, places in the vocal system to produce the sounds, the words, the articulation, right? But instead, all it's doing is it's checking does it sound right or not? Not that you've actually produced the sound in the right way, which is what the science of tajweed does. So there's a real disruption happening there, which my view needs to be understood and resisted. Not to say that it can't serve a useful purpose in some context to help with tajweed in some context.
We have to wrap up now. Thank you so much, and a round of applause to the panelists for your time and traveling from afar as well. It was a wonderful, rich discussion, and we've left a booklet here on most of the chairs. This was a collaboration between my organization and the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion, which Chris also is engaged with, or you're working at there, right?
With them.
With them, okay, wonderful. So this was really a bit of a discussion on looking at AI. We brought this out 18 months ago. Obviously, a lot has changed, but the principles are still the same. So I really want to thank all of you for taking the time out. And it was a bit of a walk away from the center of Bradford. And just to clarify, me and Rabbi Harris have been working, for around about 2 years now. And I think it's really important to understand that many of the countries around the world are trying to balance and look at the harms and the benefits. And it is a very challenging thing because at the same time, you want your countries and your nations to flourish. And what I will say, the work that we started and when we got together for the launch of the commission, when we presented our work on AI, faith, and ethics, the president of the UAE saw the booklet and he said, "This is the most important thing to me, that faith intersects with ethics." And he said, "Please go ahead and, tell us what you need and we will back you." So faith is an extremely important point still in many Muslim countries as well. They are very theocentric. But also, we are dealing with an age of where quantum AI is soon in our midst as well. What are we going to do then? How are we going to manage the social ills or inheriting the baggage of social media? So thank you to everyone, seriously, for coming over for today's session. And please do, if you want to have a quick engagement with the speakers after the session, please do so. And once again, thank you to the Bradford Literature Festival. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Explore Words, Discover Worlds podcast with Bradford Literature Festival. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share this episode with others and leave a rating.